Got a high-level go-to guy tonight. We got a lot to discuss.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you at part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, the liability that we run on Friday evenings is that we tape the program on Thursday, and based on the Washington and immigration border news cycle, everything could have changed dramatically between the time that we recorded this program for this Friday night, which is Thursday afternoon, and how you're watching it. But we'll plot ahead, and if things change for next week, we'll catch up. But Timothy Edgar is my cybersecurity expert. Well, mine. I don't own him, but he's the guy that we call when we need a real insight on that. But his experience and his scope is broader than that, and so I'm going to get his take on a bunch of things. But there's no way that we can, avoid what has been this week's news cycle. So let's just jump right into it. Skip the local stuff today and catch up on that next week. Headline here. And then, of course, it's as if he was going to do it the entire way, I think.
So we're keeping families together, and this will solve that problem.
On Monday, he didn't have the authority to do what he did on Wednesday, so he says.
Right.
Do you think, my esteemed professor, welcome by the way.
Sure.
Do you think he actually knows what he signed on Wednesday?
I do, and I think it's very cynical because the policy decision he made was to have this zero tolerance policy of prosecuting people at the border, and that's what he means when he says he had to do the separations. But that was a decision that he made, and he hadn't actually reversed it. This doesn't actually reverse it at all. All it says is we're going to try to detain families together. They don't have any facilities to do that.
Right.
They don't have a plan to do that.
Right.
So I just think he was seeing the headlines. He was seeing the pictures of children in cages. He knew how horrific that was politically for him, but he didn't want to have the responsibility of saying, I made a mistake and I'm going to change my mind about it. And this is a recurring theme with this president, is he avoids responsibility over and over again. He's the president. He's in charge of immigration enforcement. He's in charge of how to do it. This is his policy. He needs to own this decision. He needs to realize how terrible it was and correct it, and he hasn't actually done that.
Well, I've often tried to study Donald Trump and determine for myself whether or not he's smart enough to know what his ambiguity sounds like, or whether he's not smart enough to grasp the subject, and so that's how the ambiguity gets articulated. I'm more speaking about Monday, when he was saying, look, this is about the Democrats, this is the law, right. Our hands are tied, I don't have the power to change this. In the meantime, arguing that it wasn't policy, deflecting that question, not answering it directly, but the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, on the record, his Chief of Staff previously on the record, talking about it being a policy, talking about it sending a message.
Right.
The Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, just getting herself into the worst jam, one of the worst press briefings I've ever seen in history,
sure.
Where she looked so angry.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
she was embattled in the entire thing. I couldn't figure out if she was angry out of a legitimate defense of the policy, or that she had been put in that particular situation. What did you think?
I think it's an indefensible policy, separating children from their parents.
And every time she answered the question, it was in conflict with the answer to the question before.
You know, when you're put in the position of having to defend the indefensible, you're going to get angry. You're going to lash out. That's what Kirstjen Nielsen's been doing. That's what Trump's been doing. And I can tell you, my priest was pretty angry about Attorney General Sessions using the Bible to try to justify mistreating immigrants. He says there's,
So is his pastor, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's very little that's extremely clear from the Bible, but one of those things is you have to welcome the stranger. So when it's this clear, when it's this stark, and you're out there defending the indefensible every day, you're going to start taking some heat, and you're going to start getting angry at yourself.
Here's the thing about it that I think is most puzzling. I think you said it right, that even what happened on Wednesday and this reversal, this executive order that didn't supplant zero tolerance policy, has become more and more confusing. This morning, meaning Thursday morning when we were taping, I was watching a report on one of the networks that some 17 people had been processed, not with misdemeanor charges, So it left everybody in limbo. The prosecutors didn't know what to do. The lawyers for the people crossing the border didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. So confusion now has developed from whatever was signed and articulated on Wednesday. It leaves, I think, a lot of people who want to continue to say, hey, that's not good enough, in a funny position, because to Trump's credit, he seems able to create some kind of marketed punctuation resolve, as if what he did on Wednesday was, all right, I did what you wanted me to do.
Right.
We're done, okay?
Right.
But it really kicks up more dust than not, doesn't it?
It's just more evasion of responsibility. On Monday, it was the Democrats are making me do this. That was a lie. On Wednesday, it's I'm ending the policy. That was also a lie. The president is in charge of a very complex immigration enforcement system. He made a decision that resulted in the separation of these families. He still hasn't reversed that decision. That decision was this zero tolerance policy. He can say, oh, I don't want the separation of families,
but some
until he
were
reverses the
prosecuted with
policy.
a misdemeanor, which is the essence of the zero tolerance today. So who knows what the reverberating orders are here?
It's a complete mess. It's complete chaos, I think, in the executive branch when you're ordered to do something that's so obviously wrong.
So you're a security guy. What does that mean for security?
It's very bad, because we need to be focused on the threats. We need to be focused on criminals, on potential terrorists. That was the enforcement priority under Obama and under Bush, by the way. Because you understood that you couldn't just go after every undocumented immigrant. I mean, there are just too many of them. It overwhelms the system. So you can decide, you can be angry, you can not like that, or you can think that we need to do something to address that problem. But if you're worried about security, and you're worried about gangs, and you're worried about terrorists, then you need to focus the limited enforcement resources you have on that problem.
Does he really want the wall? Is this wall really the linchpin to Democrats and Republicans figuring something out?
It's a symbol that he wants to show that we're going to close ourselves off to immigration, that we're going to, you know, in his mind, get serious about closing our borders.
Very expensive projected symbol.
It's a disaster from a security standpoint. It
Why?
does very little for security. Because when you think about the number of people coming in and out of the country every day, tourists, business visitors on legal visas, as well as the illegal immigration problem, you need to be focused on those individuals that you think are going to be terrorists or going to be serious violent criminals. And building a wall is a distraction from that. That's difficult to do.
I mean, it's hard to project anything these days. It's hard to predict tomorrow.
Yeah.
But what do you think happens from this turbulence and confusion still at the border?
Well, I think there'll probably be a lot more lawsuits, a lot more cases that are going to be decided in the courts. It's distracting us from the real game, which is dealing with gangs and violence, dealing with terrorism. So, you know, we could have more problems down the road when it comes to those issues. And what I worry about is that when you see some horrific terrorist attack or some incident like that, that instead of taking the correct lesson from that, which is we distracted ourselves with a bunch of families and enforcing the law in way on people who weren't dangerous. Instead, we're going to use it for even worse crackdowns on civil liberties, for even worse policies, because it'll be a way of frightening people.
Right. It's only been literally 12 days since the North Korean summit in Singapore.
That's right.
I'll get Tim's take on that when we come back. Stay with us.
Usual close consultation ongoing as we sort out the way ahead. Everything is going fine between us and the Republic of Korea, specifically between the chairman and his counterpart, between myself and my counterpart, Minister Song, and we'll sort out some of the details here.
Gosh, I mean, there's a guy that is seemingly the most steady influence in this administration. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think definitely one of them.
Secretary Mattis, we're speaking about,
yeah,
Defense Secretary.
Yeah, yeah.
Korea, what's your take?
Well, you know, I think there's sort of two answers to you. So I'll give you two answers. One is the conventional kind of Washington national security establishment answer, which is this was a terrible idea. You know, we didn't really get anything from the North Koreans for this summit. We got a couple prisoners released ahead of the summit. They've been wanting these pictures. They've been wanting to be taken seriously on the world stage. Then you get Chairman Kim up there with President Trump, and we don't get anything for all those pictures except for a promise that we'll talk about nuclearization. And I guess I kind of intellectually, my brain says that's probably right. But there's still a little piece of me that says, you know, we've been doing that for a long time and it hasn't done anything. So what's the big, what's the big deal? So on this, I'm be delighted to be proven wrong. I'd be absolutely delighted if this was Trump's huge foreign policy success, if, he decided to think outside the box and did something a little bit, weird by conventional standards and get something out of it. But we haven't gotten anything yet. That's the key point. What we've gotten is some pictures and a promise from the dictator of North Korea that, he's going to play nice. Seems unlikely that we can do anything.
It's the very
with that
essence of, or the very intrinsic value of the temperature being taken down.
Yeah,
valuable.
I think that is valuable, but I guess I feel like it was a big get for the North Koreans to have this summit, and they've wanted it that long. Again, I'd love to be proven wrong.
Maybe they'll taste it so well that they'll be potentially more accommodating because they like the taste of being in the game.
Could be, and I actually thought that hokey video that the Trump White House created for Kim, I thought that was actually a pretty creative idea. To communicate with another leader. I mean, the irony is that we hear stories from inside the White House that Trump, thinks this way, that he thinks like, television, visuals, this kind of thing, rather than memos. Maybe he has a kindred spirit in the dictator of North Korea.
I doubt very much that Kim is desirous of beaches and tourist spots.
Hard to believe, but it was kind of the carrot to see if they would come along. Now, the one thing I think was unforgivable is when the president talked about Kim being a tough guy, when he failed to bring up human rights at all. That was totally unnecessary. It's one thing to try some diplomacy, something Barack Obama liked to do and got a lot of heat from the Republicans when he did it. So I think it's great if Trump's going to try some diplomacy, but you don't have to go in there and coddle dictators, especially when you're picking fights with your friends in Europe over trade and other things. We have friends and we have adversaries, and we need to keep those straight, and Trump has trouble doing that sometimes.
Do you find it fascinating, though, that the nature of this transactional presidency and the speed of the news cycle, that summit, whether you liked it or not, whether you thought it was well prepared or not, whether you liked the theme, the context, the execution or not, is a historic moment. It's gone from the news cycle. It's gone from everybody's conscious. It's not gone, but it's just everything is so fast.
Right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
I do, and I think it's important that we don't succumb to that, because the key question here, as with everything else, is accountability and follow-up. We didn't really accomplish anything in North Korea other than giving the dictator of North Korea a stage on which to shine. Are we going to get something from that? We're only going to see that with some sustained additional attention.
You worried about war games with South Korea being suspended here?
Yes, I am. I think that was another concession. So, he made some big concessions to the North, and are we going to get anything out of those concessions?
Mark Janess was here a few days ago. Said, August, no big deal. If things don't get on the right track, we should go right back to them.
That's probably what people like General Mattis are thinking. That's probably what people inside the national security establishment are thinking. So I see it as a giant stunt. And, President Trump, is bad at a lot of things. He's good at stunts. And if this stunt is successful, great. Most people would say probably not. But, only time will tell.
All right. The Muller investigation. Tim has written something about obstruction that I think is really interesting. Stay with us. All right, so ongoing is the Mueller investigation, and of course the sideshow, an important one, was the investigation internally within the Justice Department. Here's the latest on that.
FBI Director Christopher Wray told the Senate Judiciary Committee he's committed to making sure the agency doesn't repeat any mistakes made during the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
This report is focused on a specific set of events back in 2016 and a small number of FBI employees connected with those events. Mistakes made by those employees do not define our 37,000 men and women and the great work they do every day.
Let's not pretend like this was some one-off problem. there is a serious problem with the culture at FBI headquarters.
Last week, the Justice Department released its internal report on the Clinton email investigation, slamming the FBI for misjudgment and missteps. It also found insubordination on the part of former Director James Comey, but no evidence of political bias. Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley accused the agency of just that.
Millions of Americans suspect that there is a double standard.
For publicly discussing the Clinton emails while keeping secret its probe into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia.
They see a story of kid-glove treatment for one side and bare-knuckle tactics for the other.
Director Wray, the president said on Friday the Muller investigation has been totally discredited by the Inspector General report.
I do not believe Special Counsel Mueller is on a witch hunt.
The FBI is promising to retrain all of its employees. Wray said he won't hesitate to, quote, throw the book at agents who violate the rules.
All right, so what's interesting, I read the Comey book.
Yeah.
And I need to dig deeper into this internal IG investigation into the FBI activity. But he outlines in pretty clear fashion the damned if you do, damned if you didn't position he felt he was in between the Clinton investigation, which was public, and the Russian investigation on Trump, which was not public.
That's right.
What's your take on this?
Well, I guess I disagree with Comey's decision on, I definitely disagree with Comey's decision on sending that letter right before the election about reopening the Clinton investigation. I do think there were, he was in a tough spot. I think that there were, dangers no matter what he did. But I think that the conclusion that he draws is the wrong one. The conclusion should be when you don't know, when there's dangers on either side, you follow the policy. And the policy has always been don't disclose ongoing investigative details, especially when they might affect an election. And so when I was in government and I had a tough call to make, sometimes I would talk to superiors. I'd say, well, this is a really tough choice. And they'd say, yeah, this is a tough choice, so you should just do the one that makes sense according to the policy. And I'd be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, the policy and the law. But I think he's a good man, and I think he's, had the right interests of his agency at heart and of the country at heart. I just think he made a bad decision in that case. Insubordination
and illegal activity, two very different things.
Absolutely, and I think insubordination is maybe not a word I would have used in that case.
It's almost as if they felt like they needed to use a tough word.
Yeah, he did something without consulting and coordinating with the Justice Department. He did give them a heads up, and they could have told him to knock it off. If he had violated a direct order of the Justice Department, yeah, that would be insubordination.
He was concerned about the Attorney General's bias.
Yes. I mean, I think he was, again, I don't agree
Loretta Lynch at the time.
Right. I don't think he made the right decision, and I also think that it's a good idea for FBI directors to coordinate with the Justice Department. So I think this was a mistake, but to call it insubordination, I think probably goes too far.
Puts the FBI, maybe recenters them a little bit, but it's understandable based on the spin cycle of the 2016 election and the way things run now, that even the FBI would get caught up in perception analysis.
Yeah, I think that was kind of where he went off the rails. I think the FBI director, of course you should be aware of perception, but I think that when you're focused so much on, well, if I do this, the Republicans will criticize me because they'll say that I was trying to conceal something. Well, of course they're going to criticize you. You're always going to get criticized from Republicans, Democrats, whatever. The question is, do you have a good reason? And the answer is absolutely have a good reason. It's an investigation. We don't disclose information from investigations. So, it seems to me that he was overthinking the problem and trying to anticipate and protect the agency a little bit too much from criticism.
You've written a fascinating piece in Lawfare, which is, I know, very wonky for most of us, but you learn so much on it. Trump can end the Russia probe, but that doesn't mean he can obstruct it. Explain.
So, President Trump has all the powers the Constitution gives the president. He can issue pardons. He can make decisions about foreign policy. He can decide we want to have a better relationship with Russia. He can choose enforcement priorities. So he has the power, if he thinks it's a witch hunt, to end the witch hunt. He can go in and pardon everybody. He can shut the investigation down. The Constitution gives him all that power. Of course, the Constitution also gives Congress the power to impeach him if they think he's abusing his power. And when you act publicly and dramatically like that, when you take responsibility, there's going to be a political consequence. Trump doesn't want that political consequence. He would rather snipe at the investigation and undermine it. And perhaps, we don't know yet, but Mueller is going to see, you know, maybe do some other things that might even be obstruction of justice to try to undermine that investigation. He can't do that.
You don't think, well,
I mean, he can't legally do that.
If he pardoned through, I mean, Rudy Giuliani predicted last week that there'd be pardons, and he retreated and suggested that that wouldn't happen until the investigation is over.
He's not going to pardon people because he doesn't want to take the political consequence of pardoning people. Not because he doesn't have the power, but because, you know, again, this is very much like we were talking about at the beginning of the hour with the immigration debate. You know, he wants everything else to be somebody else's fault. To get up there and say the buck stops here, you know, I've made a decision for the good of the country, the Russia probe's gone on too long, I'm ending it, that means he has to take the political criticism of doing that. So, you know, my point is, put up or shut up, Mr. President. You know, if you believe, if you and Sean Hannity think this is this giant witch hunt, you know, who's running the executive branch? You are. End it. But then you're going to have to deal with the political backlash. You're going to have to deal with possible impeachment proceedings. And you better be able to defend yourself. If you don't think that you can do that, then shut up and let the investigation proceed.
Robert Mueller reportedly is worried about juries being affected by all the publicity. What jury is he specifically worried about? I have my own thoughts on whether juries can be tainted by publicity. I've learned that lesson a long time ago. I'll explain if I have time. What juries are he talking about?
I think you know, any of the indictments he's bringing, if people go to trial, Paul Manafort or any of the other people that are involved, even if it doesn't touch Trump, they're going to end up having strong views on this if they're at all following politics. And as we've seen, people tend to, you know, believe what they want to believe based on their political tribe. So I think Mueller is absolutely right to be worried about that. You know, I think we would try to screen those jurors and try to get rid of people that are biased. But, you know, this is such a hot, you know, button issue for people. It may be hard for them to put that aside and actually do their job.
I think this is the first blowback from Mueller playing Trump's game of trying to win the perception argument that if juries become... I wish the American public was as checked in as Bob Mueller thinks it might be.
Well,
I don't have time to tell the story, but I learned as a Cub reporter way back when how little people pay attention to this stuff.
Well, you know, I have a great faith in the justice system. I do actually think it's possible to pick a jury that is unbiased and that people will do their jobs. You know, I think it makes sense to be careful in a high-profile case like this, but we have a lot of high-profile cases, so I think you're basically right. I mean, I think you could pick a fair jury. But it's going to take some care to do that in a case like this.
Give me 10 seconds. What's next?
You know, who knows? But actually, what's I think coming up could be as early as tomorrow, could be next week, is the Supreme Court is going to make a big decision about cell phone location privacy. They're having to decide whether that is protected by the Fourth Amendment.
Which is why you should read Tim's book, Timothy Edgar, Snowden.
Beyond Snowden.
Beyond Snowden.
Yep.
Pick that book up. You'll learn a lot about who's watching who. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
Final word and we come back. Gun violence on Monday, the perspective from the emergency room. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.